Welcome to our deep dive this time into something pretty unique, I think. We're looking at Franz Kafka's letter to his father.
Ah.
You might be thinking, okay, a letter.
Yeah.
How exciting can that be? But this isn't just some letter. It's really a window into Kafka's mind.
Yeah, one of the most enigmatic writers
Yeah,
ever, really.
exactly. And it's not even just about him and his dad,
Yeah.
right? It gets into all these ideas that are like universal, like how families work, how parents affect us,
Yeah.
even how we figure out who we are, all that's packed into this thing.
And it's all the more powerful because he never actually sent it to his father.
Oh, that's right.
So it's like we're getting this unfiltered look at his inner world.
Yeah, like he could be totally honest, no holding back,
Yeah.
right from the jump. Kafka describes his dad, Hermann, as this like overpowering presence, a figure who, maybe without meaning to, made him feel inferior.
Right. And it's not just, my dad was strict or whatever.
Wow.
It's deeper than that. Kafka analyzes how his dad's actions made him feel, small, insignificant, always judged.
And it's something a lot of people get right, that need to feel seen, to be understood by a parent. Like, that's huge.
Absolutely. Yeah, even brilliant minds like Kafka craved that approval. Makes you think about how important it is for parents to really validate their kids. I mean, even if you achieve great things later on, that lack of validation early on, that can stick with you.
It can leave a mark.
For sure.
And Kafka doesn't just talk about it in general. He gives these really vivid examples.
Oh, yeah.
Like there's this one, when he was a kid, begging for water in the night. And what happens? His dad punishes him, makes him sleep out on the balcony.
Wow, just imagine that. For a little kid feeling all vulnerable, and instead of comfort, you got what? Rejection, isolation. It shows you just how differently Kafka and his father saw the world, What might have seemed like nothing to Hermann, like just a little discipline, was traumatic for Kafka.
Totally different wavelengths.
Yeah, and that disconnect, that feeling of being totally misunderstood, that comes up again and again in the letter.
Anyone who's ever felt unseen, unheard,
Yeah.
especially by someone they're supposed to be close to, they'll get that.
Kafka nails that feeling. The isolation, the emotional distance. It's powerful.
Makes you wonder how these early experiences shaped his whole outlook, maybe even influenced his writing.
Well, if you look at the bigger picture of Kafka's work, you can see how these feelings of powerlessness, of isolation, they show up again and again. Think of the metamorphosis.
Right.
The guy wakes up as a giant insect, totally dehumanized, trapped, much like he felt under his father's judgment.
Okay, so we've got this dominant father figure, this son who feels trapped, misunderstood. But it goes beyond just Kafka's feelings. He actually starts to analyze his dad's parenting.
Yeah, this is where the letter gets even more insightful. He's not just complaining. He digs into why his dad acted the way he did, pointing out what he saw as inconsistencies, hypocrisies even.
Like that accusation of hypocrisy, Kafka felt his dad demanded respect from everyone, but didn't always give it back, especially not to his own family.
And that makes you think about how kids develop their own sense of morality. Imagine growing up where the rules seem random, where the person you're supposed to learn from, they don't practice what they preach.
Yeah, that's got to be confusing. Kafka seems to suggest that this contributed to his own struggles with self-doubt, even with a sense of right and wrong, like things weren't clear-cut.
It's a fascinating look at how childhood can shape our whole understanding of right and wrong authority relationships, even our own identity.
And then you've got the issue of Kafka's aspirations.
Yeah.
He loved writing, but his dad just didn't get it at all. Like they spoke different languages.
It's this huge clash of perspectives. Hermann was a self-made man from a different generation. Practicality, business success, that's what mattered to him. He couldn't grasp the value of art. And this created this gulf between them, fueled Kafka's feeling of being unseen, unappreciated for who he really was.
Yeah, and yet, even with all this tension, Kafka tries to understand his dad's side.
Right, this is where we see Kafka's maturity. He acknowledges the hardships his dad faced, growing up poor, building a business. He tries to see him as a product of his time and circumstances.
So it's not about excusing his dad's behavior, but trying to understand the forces that shaped him.
Exactly, recognizing that even flawed people have their own stories.
Yeah. It's nuanced. He gets that. It's not black and white.
Right, there's this compassion, a deeper understanding, even within a difficult relationship.
Not easy to do, especially when you've been hurt.
It shows real depth of character.
It makes you wonder, though, what if he had sent the letter? Would things have been different between them?
Who knows? We can only speculate.
It's a thought-provoking question for sure. I'm ready to dig deeper into this. What else can we uncover? It's amazing how this one letter, it connects to so much more than just Kafka and his dad. Like it sheds light on his whole life,
Mm.
his work too.
That's what makes this so interesting. We're not just looking at some old document. We're
Hmm.
seeing how this very personal struggle leads to these universal themes, ideas that still resonate today.
We've talked about this feeling of being misunderstood, the whole power dynamic between Kafka and Hermann. But what really got me was how those experiences show up in Kafka's writing,
Hmm.
especially in how he portrays authority.
Yeah, you're picking up on something important there. It's like his struggles with his father's authority. They had a huge impact on how he saw the world. He almost projected that experience onto society as a whole.
You mean like in novels like The Trial and The Castle? They're
Mhm.
full of these oppressive systems, bureaucracies, where individuals feel completely powerless.
Exactly. Those books aren't just about boring bureaucracy. They're about the struggle against these impersonal, often absurd systems of power. It's like Kafka took that feeling of being stifled by his father and applied it to this bigger, more abstract concept.
So you're saying those stories, seemingly fantastical as they are, they're actually rooted in something very real, very human.
Exactly. Kafka struggles with authority. They become this powerful metaphor for the human condition itself, that feeling of being trapped by forces we can't control. It's that universality that makes his work so enduring.
It makes you think about how our own experiences, even those from childhood, they shape our understanding of the world around us, maybe even how we create art.
That's a great question to consider. How much of our creativity comes from trying to process our experiences, especially the tough ones?
We've been talking about Kafka's struggles with authority
Hmm.
and how they show up in his writing. But what about his personal life? Did his relationship with his father affect how he interacted with others?
Well, Kafka was known for having trouble forming close relationships, romantic ones in particular. He had all this self-doubt, fear of rejection. He often sabotaged his own attempts at intimacy.
Do you think that goes back to his experiences with his father?
It's definitely possible. Imagine growing up feeling constantly judged, inadequate. It's not hard to see how that could lead to a fear of being vulnerable, a reluctance to let others in.
It's like he never learned to trust or believe that he was worthy of love, of acceptance.
Yeah, and that points to a bigger issue, the impact of early childhood experiences. They can create these deep-seated beliefs about ourselves, about the
Hmm.
world, beliefs that are really hard to change.
Makes you want to go back and tell young Kafka, hey, it's okay to be vulnerable. You deserve love.
I think we all have those moments where we wish we could go back, offer our younger selves some wisdom. But as Kafka's letter reminds us, life is messy, unpredictable. Our experiences, both good and bad, shape who we become.
We've been focusing a lot on Herman's impact. But is it fair to paint him as the villain here? Was he really that bad?
That's a good point to bring up. We're only getting one side of the story, Kafka's side. We don't hear from Herman.
So maybe Kafka, maybe without realizing it, exaggerated things. Or at least saw the past through the lens of his own hurt, resentment.
It's possible. To be fair to Kafka, though, he does acknowledge this in the letter. He talks about how his father was a product of his time, a self-made man who went through a lot.
It seems like he was really trying to understand his dad's perspective, acknowledge how complex their relationship was.
Exactly. It's not just a blame game. It's this nuanced look at a flawed nature, but ultimately human relationship. Kafka wrestles with his anger, his hurt, but he also tries to see his father as a complex individual.
I think we can all relate to that. Relationships, especially family ones, they're rarely simple.
For sure, there's love, resentment, understanding, frustration, all mixed together. And often it's in that mess, in those complexities, that we find the most meaningful connections.
Even with all the pain Kafka describes, it feels like he never gave up on his father entirely. There are these hints of hope, almost a longing for reconciliation.
There is, and that's a really powerful element, despite everything. Kafka seems to hold on to this sliver of hope, this belief that maybe someday they could understand each other.
That's a pretty hopeful message to find in such a personal, at times painful letter.
It shows Kafka's capacity for empathy, for forgiveness. Even in the midst of all that hurt, he sees his father's humanity. And I think that's one of the biggest takeaways here, the power of understanding, of compassion, even in the most challenging relationships.
We've uncovered so much already,
Yeah.
but there's still more to explore. Where else can we go from here? This letter really makes you think about family, about how we communicate the impact of childhood. It's a lot.
Yeah, and one thing we haven't really touched on yet is how different generations see things. That adds a whole other layer to this story. Kafka and his father, they were like from different planets.
So true. Herman was this self-made man from a different time, you know? Practicality, traditional success, those were his big things.
Okay.
But they just didn't click with Franz. The sensitive artist.
It's like they spoke different languages, totally different values, priorities. And that gap in communication, that inability to really get each other, that's at the core of their conflict.
And that's something we still see today.
Right.
These generational divides on everything, tech, social value.
Oh, absolutely. It's everywhere. Trying to explain the latest app to your grandparents, debating politics with your parents. These differences can cause friction, even in the closest families. And what Kafka's letter shows us is that this isn't new. It's been going on for generations.
So how do we deal with these differences in a way that's productive? How do we get past the blame, the judgment, and actually connect with people who see things so differently?
Well, Kafka's attempt to understand his father, that gives us some clues. It starts with recognizing that everyone is shaped by their time and experiences.
Instead of just dismissing his dad as being out of touch, Kafka tries to see how Hermann's past, his struggles influence his worldview.
Yeah.
It's like realizing that our loved ones, they might be coming from a completely different place, with different assumptions, different experiences.
Exactly. And it's not about saying hurtful behavior is okay. It's more about trying to see where that behavior comes from. Understanding that even the people closest to us, they're influenced by things beyond our control.
It reminds us that good communication, it's not just about talking, it's about listening, trying to see through someone else's eyes,
Yeah.
even when it's hard, even when it's uncomfortable.
It's about empathy, which can be so tough, but ultimately so worth it.
Kafka's letter shows just how hard those conversations can be, but it also shows us that it's worth the effort.
And that brings us to, I think, one of the key takeaways from this whole deep dive, Kafka's letter to his father. It's not just some private diary entry or a weird literary thing. It's this timeless exploration of what it means to be human, of how relationships work. And it still speaks to people centuries later.
It reminds us that even brilliant minds like Kafka, they struggled with things. We all face family conflict, feeling inadequate, trying to figure out who we are, where we belong. And in that struggle, he gives us this powerful message about communication, about empathy, about always trying to understand.
Right. It's that universality that makes this letter so powerful. It tells us that even in our darkest moments, we're not alone. We're all part of the shared human experience, trying to figure things out, trying to make sense of life and relationships.
This deep dive has been a real roller coaster, but so insightful. We've gone deep into this father-son relationship, uncovered themes that speak to all of us, and I think we've come away with a new appreciation for Kafka's brilliance.
It's been great exploring all this with you, and I hope Kafka's letter will inspire our listeners to think about their own relationships and all the things that make them who they are.
Big thanks to you for taking us on this journey. It's been fascinating. And to our listeners, keep exploring, keep questioning, keep diving deep. We'll see you next time.